objects within your classroom. So today we're going to talk about attic archaeology. This is a project that I did many years ago, and I've repeated it a number of times. And I did this with fourth, fifth, and sixth graders. So I do believe that this is something that younger students can handle. Of course, it won't look the same way that it would if you were doing this with seventh or eighth graders or even seniors in high school. But I do think that this offers a lot of opportunities for our students to really dig into their family history. So the way it works is that the project is that we asked students to bring an object or a picture of that object, because sometimes the object was precious enough that moms and dads didn't want those objects going to school. So pictures worked just as well. And we had, in the elementary school where I started this project, we had a number of students that were moving from apartment to apartment with great regularity. And so we also made arrangements with all of the teachers in our building that they would be willing to share an object and participate with that student if the student wasn't able to get one. So that way, all of the students were able to come up with some kind of an object. And the picture you see here, I think you may remember it from the last time that we talked. Again, this is my butter mold from my grandmother's. And so part of this project, we asked the students to interview a family member about the object. And so that's why it was so important that if teachers were providing an object, the student would be able to interview them about the object. And we provided them, we developed a set of questions that they could use to kind of really dig into what that object was and why it was meaningful to that family. And then we asked them, because this was actually part of a decade study. My teachers came and said, oh, it's time to, study the decades, but we don't have time to hit every one of them. And we're tired of the old, everybody do a report about a decade. And so what can we do different? So this is what we did. So one of the things that the student had to identify was how old the object was. So when it was created or purchased or became part of the family, what decade was it in? And it was interesting because we actually got some things that came from the 1900s, the 1910s. So there are families that have precious objects that have meaning and have been in the family for a long time. So those were the two basic parts of it. And then as part of that, then we asked the students to tell those stories. And I'm breaking this down, so we're going to talk about it a little bit, each component a little bit at a time. But I want to share these activities with you because while we didn't do all of these that first time, these are things that I've added as time has gone by, and I've used this attic archaeology project a number of times. But one is that one of our state art museums has some educational things, and I came across this one and I really like it. Can everybody see that? Okay, great. This is just a very simple activity that they did where they provided a picture of an object. And actually, this is not a real doctor's bag. This is actually a sculpture of the doctor's bag. But if in Northwest Arkansas, there's a small, it's an old Victorian house, but it is a medical museum, and it is all of the things that a local traveling doctor had in his possession. His house was also his office, and so this kind of reminded me of that. But this asked some specific questions about this particular object, and then gives them an opportunity to write about it. And again, I think that's when you've looked at, and I could see having a group of kids working together to examine this particular object and answer some of these questions, and then do a reflection on that as using this activity. So I really like adding this, something similar to this, to that activity. The next one is, and we use this extensively, I had become pretty invested in StoryCorps, which is a project that is a part of the National Public Radio. And even now, if you listen to them on Fridays, they pull from this. It's in conjunction with the Library of Congress, and that's where these all of these stories are. And if you're not familiar with it, basically what happens is that two people have an opportunity to sit down together and have a conversation that talks about their story. So one of the a piece that I really liked about that is that, and let's see if I can get to those. Part of, in addition to that, just a general, which, and I'm giving you a Google folder that's got all of these documents in it, but it actually gives them a planning guide where they can sit through and think about who they're going to interview, what kinds of questions that they want to ask, to drill down into the original purpose that we had for them doing interviews, which was to examine an object and determine why that object had significance for their family. But in addition to that document, they've also provided one, and let's see if I can find it. There it is. One of the things that I really liked is that they have developed this awesome list of questions that you can ask, and they're categorized so that if I'm interviewing a grandparent, then here are some questions that I can ask. And what I think are so great about these questions is that they're not yes or no answers. They really are ones designed to get that person to really telling their story. So I love these questions, and there's 2 or 3 pages of these questions. And so I've used this in a number of occasions with students to help them, because one of the things I've noticed is that students have a really hard time asking those good kinds of questions that give who they're interviewing an opportunity to really dig into it. And then this is something else that I came across, and I have not figured out how to turn this because there's no rotation thing on any of in this, because it's a PDF. I don't know why it won't let me do it. But this is talking about the community story, and it gives just some really nice advice, not only on doing interviews, but collecting information about their community. When you download it, you'll be able to turn it and see it. But those are 3 activities that I think are really nice to expand on this attic archaeology project that we did. In addition to the objects and exploring those in the family stories, the other thing that we asked them to do was to identify the decade that object came from, whether it was built, created, whatever. And so once we identified the decade, then we put those students that had the same decade into a group, and they determined themselves. We had a whole list of aspects about that decade that we wanted them to explore. So they picked 2 topics from that, and we did politics, literature, popular culture, entertainment, science, technology, all of those things, major events, famous people from that decade. And they had to do some research on those topics. And then together, and I just put in here the link to, because I don't live in the state of Kentucky. I couldn't get any further than this in looking at it. But if you're not using these databases, then you need to be using them, because there's a lot of really good. I went to the list. I was able to get that, and there's some really great databases in here that your students can use. And some of these are even at a level where your younger students can have access to those. So please don't forget to use those in any kind of research that you ask your students to do. So once we got the research done, then we asked our students to actually prepare a museum exhibit. And this is an actual picture. It's not a very good one, but it's an actual picture from one of our students who, because in addition to putting together a museum exhibit about their decade, then we also we brought in a museum education person who talked to them about how to be a docent and how to, we talked about curation, but then the person who came from the museum talked to them about being a docent and how not only did you want to share your knowledge about what you had, but also you wanted to ask the people who were coming to look at your exhibit some questions to help them dig in and do some analysis. So we actually had them prepare a list of a short list of questions, because once they we turned the library into a museum. Every decade, every group had an area where they could set up. And we had some students that were so ambitious that they actually came in costume. I remember one of the kids' father had an album, an Elvis album, which was actually autographed by Elvis, and the dad came to guard it on the day that we actually exhibited it. Because he didn't want anything to happen to it. But his son, who had that, actually had an Elvis outfit, the white suit, and so he wore that he decided that he was going to be a living historical character as opposed to just being a docent. So we had a lot of kids who we really gave them a lot of leeway in how they set up their exhibits and then how they did them. And so they spent the whole day. We invited the whole rest of the school to come and visit these exhibits and go through them. And then we had a parent night where the parents came. And so that was a very long day, but it was really an awesome experience. And the learning that those kids did was just really something. And if you ask them about studying decades, they were very much engaged in it. So it was not a boring project at all. When I was preparing these slides, though, I came across another project that's not quite as extensive, but I've included this lesson plan in there. But you can see that the product that the students turned out for their decade was this poster. And I thought it was kind of a neat approach. And so that's going to be in there as well for you, so that if you and really the attic archaeology project, you could take some aspects of it and not have to do the whole project. But it really was a great experience, and we had the time. We were able to pull in the time to do that. I've also done this. I'm not been with 7th and 8th graders very much, but I have done this with high school students. So I know that, and we did it a little differently, but because we required more depth from those students, but I think it's one that can be adjusted for a lot of different grade levels. I want to talk about this because in addition to actually doing an exhibit that was in real life like what we did, I've also done a project which made virtual museums, and you could do this setting up a website. There are a lot of those, even a Google site. This could work where you could do this, but this project asked students to use slide presentations to develop their museum exhibits. And so I came across this article where, and this is also in the Google folder, but she gives a number of samples of an educational virtual museum, and you can see that I don't know if this is big enough for you to see this. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger. But she's done a number that connected with Native Americans. And so those are some really nice examples. She also has a lot of instructions and has provided, excuse me, some actual templates that students could use, and some of them are very elaborate and some of them are quite simple. So you can see that there's a lot of different ways to approach this, and she's given you several ideas of how you could use this. But I want to show you an example. This is one that I did as a model for the students when we got ready to do this, this project. And so again, I'm going back to my own family stories because I always want to come back to that, because I think that our students relate so much more to looking at history through family stories. So these are my grandmothers, Grace Keeling, and you saw the butter mold earlier, and this is my other grandmother, Pearl. And one of the things, and I actually have these objects as well, is this brush and mirror. So this is what the beginning, this is the main room of my museum. And if I click on some of these, then I can actually go to rooms where I've done more research. So if I click on the butter mold, then this takes me to a room, this is Grace's room, where I can spend more time talking about not only the butter mold, but some aspects of this, because the butter mold became a possession of my grandmother's in the 30s. So I can click on this picture and it will take me to the information that I gathered. And this is my grandmother's story. Those of you that it's been a while since I talked about it, but in this, my grandmother inherited this from her mother, and the butter, once the butter was set, it was packed into this little butter mold and placed in an ice box. And students, I could have gone down a rabbit hole and talked about ice boxes and the fact that it was different from a refrigerator, because every day or every other day, the Iceman would come and deliver a great big huge block of ice. Or in the case of people who lived in rural areas, during the winter, they would actually cut ice into big blocks and store those in a cellar where it was cool and dark, and put those in that ice box to help keep foods cool. And so so then once I've talked about that, then I can return back to Grace's room, and I can talk again about the other things that I found. And when I was doing research, one of the things I found in my decade study about the 30s was that, whoops, go back, was that this is when, that because of the Depression, there were a whole lot of men who were transient. They went from one place to the other, trying to find work. And it was called, and they would hop on trains, and it was called riding the rail. And this was when the term hobos came about. That's not something that I knew before I started doing this research. And my grandmother, during this time, because they lived very close to railroad tracks, always had a list of jobs that she kept in the kitchen that needed to be done, because these men would hop off and ask for food, but in order to maintain their dignity, they wanted to do work in exchange for it. They didn't necessarily just want a handout. So she would have these jobs for them to do in exchange for the food that she provided. So again, now I can go back to my exhibit. And another thing that I found out that I never knew about was that the hobos actually created an alphabet or a set of symbols, pictographs, that they could put somewhere on the side of a building or somewhere that would tell people that were coming behind them information about either the place, the town, all of that. And so you can see here that a cat represented that a kind-hearted woman lived there. And then there were symbols for things like they will give you food in exchange for work, or this is a good place to get a handout, or these people will let you sleep in their barn. So there were all of these symbols that gave these messages. And so again, I found that really interesting and not something that I knew. So again, now I can go back to my room. And now that we've talked about my grandmother Grace, now it's time to talk about my grandmother Pearl. And so again, I can click on that and it takes me to Pearl's room. And in Pearl's room, now I can find out more about this mirror. And this mirror and brush are actually made out of ivory. And I can remember this when I was young and stayed there, that she combed out her hair and always wore it in a bun. And at night she would take the bun out and she would brush her hair 100 strokes. I don't know what that is, but that's an old thing. I've read that in lots of books and stuff, that brushing your hair 100 strokes, I don't know, made it shiny, did something to it. It stimulated the scalp. But anyway, and her hair was very long and she would put it in a braid to sleep in. And so this is her mirror and brush. And there are a lot of times that once ivory stopped being used so much because it was being outlawed in lots of countries and plastics had been introduced, then there were a lot of these same articles that were made out of this bakelite, which is a certain kind of plastic that very much resembles ivory. And so so again, another topic that I could go down a rabbit hole and find out about, which is bakelite, a plastic that was a good substitute for ivory. So now I can click back into the room. And another thing I found out was that during the 30s, this is when patterns became very popular. Most women couldn't really afford to have their clothes made for them or to buy them off the rack. That really wasn't something that was as prevalent as it is now. But sewing machines were very affordable for everyone. And so patterns became very popular then, so that you could make dresses that were still considered fashionable. And then of course back then, wearing hats when you were out and gloves, those were really important accessories. And so so this idea of, and you can go to Butterick and Simplicity, those makers of patterns, and they provide a lot of history about the patterns and how they were made. And a lot of times, magazines for women would include patterns that women could cut out from the magazine and make their clothes, but they came from these same companies that made these patterns. And then again, go back to my slide. And then this is not exactly the piece of furniture that my grandmother had, but she had a dressing table that was very similar to this. And so if we click on that, then I can find out about that this style was Art Deco. And so now I can dig a little deeper into the idea of Art Deco, and the fact that it liked smooth lines, very streamlined, simple in some ways, but a little bit on the decorative side, that it was very much associated with sophistication and wealth. And in the late 20s and 30s, it was a very popular style of furniture. So then, now that I've been into the 2 rooms and I've explored the objects that are in that virtual museum experience, I can go back. Whoops. Clicked on the wrong thing. I can go back to the big room. And so this creating a virtual museum like this, I think is, my students were really engaged in this. Actually, the technique for doing these slides, there was a bit of a learning curve with my students, but they're pretty savvy and they figured it out, and they weren't a bit intimidated by it. And so they, just jumped right in. And it's just a really great way for them to dig in and do some research. And again, I could see this as a possibility for another decade study, or even if you were just looking at one particular time period and you wanted your students to do this. But what I really like about this kind of an activity is that, number one, it uses objects, which I'm always in favor of. But number two, there were lots of opportunities to really dig into an aspect of this that a student would find really interesting. So I can give my students a lot of choice in how they approach doing this, because I can set some parameters about what they can include, but they can really go deep into looking at this. Another thing, another student might notice, I had a student who commented on this, that both of my grandmothers were wearing pearls. Well, that's something that was considered an essential piece of jewelry. And looking at hairstyles. So there's a lot of different things like that our students could go in. And setting this museum up, you can see that I could click through this, and it's really a linear set of slides, but how I set up moving back and forth in it, once you get the trick of that, it's a pretty simple matter to do. Anybody got any questions or anything? I'm not monitoring the chat right now, but if anybody's got any questions or comments at this point.
Well, Wendy has joined us, and then but you have been getting lots and lots of, and I appreciate you taking time for a question there, but lots and lots of information in the chat. People, Amy, I love this, and all the way going back to the beginning of your presentation. So if you have questions, feel free to
Sure.
make comments, put something else in there. Wendy, I'm going to mute myself now, and that'll be the last you hear from me. So then Wendy can jump in from this point forward. So there you go.
Well, really today my purpose was to just kind of give you some ideas that are a little different from the traditional way to study this in the traditional reports. And I found that kids are really engaged in this, number one, because they like the aspect of technology, but also they get a lot of choice about what it is they're going to pursue. And the fact that you give them a way to share that learning, then everybody's going to learn about all of those things, because but the students are now being the teachers and not me. And because I can be a talking head and that's really boring, but this I think is more exciting. But I have a few other ideas and resources. This museum curation, this was something, I have not done this with students, but I've seen it done with students. And in this museum curation, basically what it is, and I'm going back to, I provided you all with a Google folder that had all of these objects in it. And these are just examples. And again, I'm giving you the link to that in my presentation slides, which I'll share with, which are going to be in that Google folder I'm going to share with you. But the idea was that you provide a group of students, however you want to divide them, and you provide them with photographs, and those could come from what I provided, or Library of Congress has a huge collection of photographs, artwork, and stuff. And then the National Archives, oh, I want to go back to that in a minute. And the National Archives has those, but provide, and you could even pull things out of old magazines like National Geographic. I think there's still a whole lot of old copies that people have donated to schools that you could get, but any kind of photographs, pictures, and hand those to students and ask them to choose, and you can set parameters, a certain number of those, and have them curate an exhibit. It could be an art exhibit, it could be something more of a historical nature, but have students curate a collection that they could then put in one of those virtual museums or some other way, but create a gallery walk of that museum. And and that's something I forgot to show you, but I'll do it when we look at the Google folder. That virtual museum, we did a virtual gallery walk where the students looked at each of those collections and responded to them. But so I have links to all of those, and just some other ideas of things that have happened. I like this idea of, and this would really go with the attic archaeology, but I looked at, I thought some of these picture books for younger students might be a really good way to kind of tip this off, where you could talk about what an archaeologist is. And there are so many virtual tours of various places where archaeologists have gone in to do digs. But this is a nice little picture book that talks about archaeology and what archaeologists do. Again, going back to this idea of using objects, Virginia Burton has almost all of her books are about the history of an object. And The Little House is probably one most of you are familiar with, where it looks at this little house and all the changes that have happened during the course of its life and even getting moved. This one reminded me of a program that another school has done, which is, and this is looking at a street and seeing how it's changed over the course of 12,000 years. But there was this school librarian who, and these were third graders. Every year, her third graders went on a tour of their town. She made arrangements with the mayor and they went to a number of the buildings within the town and looked at the history. And then and she had a list of city officials and people who knew a lot about the history of their town. And those students, after they did their tour, they would identify one building that they wanted to pursue finding more information about. And then she would connect them with a person who knew about the history of that building, and they would interview them, and then they would share the information that they found about that particular building in their town. So I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. And then Tales of the Crypt. We have here in Central Arkansas, and actually several schools have done this, and it's a high school project, but I could see middle school students being able to do this as well. But they actually go to a local cemetery, and this is a picture of Mount Holly Cemetery, which is here in Central Arkansas, but it's historical. It was founded in I believe 1846, and it's been around a really long time. And there are a number of people who were prominent people who've had influence on the history of Arkansas. And every year there's a high school that their students go in and they identify a person that they want to get more information on. They do research, and then they create they become that character. And the second Tuesday of October every year, there's this event called Tales of the Crypt, and they actually they dress in costume, and they stand by their tombstone, and people come and visit the cemetery and do the rounds and interact with those high school students who have become that character. And so you find out a whole lot about the historical importance of these people in this cemetery. And this is actually, there are several other towns that have cemeteries, and their high school students have done this same thing, where they've gone in and identified people that had an impact on their community. And so I think it's a great idea. And I just love the idea that this is a cemetery, and this cemetery is not very far from where I live. And so it's actually where I went and observed the total solar eclipse a couple of weeks ago, because Little Rock was in the totality of the eclipse. And so it's beautifully kept. It's master gardeners keep up the grounds. And anyway, that's probably more information than you really wanted to know about that cemetery, but I do think that that's a pretty cool idea. And if that's something that you might consider doing, and I do think it's something that middle school students were capable of doing. This final one is looking at the family tree, and there are a number of picture books that have been written about finding out about our family tree, but the National Archives, and I've linked directly to it, actually has some pretty cool activities and templates that students can use to explore their own family history. And so that's something you might want to consider checking into. But in addition to that, the National Archives has a whole lot of other great resources for educators. But I thought this fit pretty well with the topic that we've been talking about today. Okay, so this is my contact information, and I'm going to stop sharing so that I can put the, wait a minute. There, so I can put that link into the chat so that you have access to it. And there we go. And so now I'm going to go back and share my screen again because I want to take you to that Google folder. So my slides are in there. This is a detailed unit project. This is the attic archaeology project. So it had some guiding questions in there, and it has the guidelines and the written directions. And remember, this was for fourth, fifth, and sixth graders. So we tried to keep it a little bit simple. And so they had to do an information sheet about their artifact, and this was turned into signage that they put into their museum exhibit with the object. And then the description of what we wanted them to do for their 2 topics of the decade. And we had detailed research information to remind that. We also had some suggested questions, which we took from StoryCorps that were specific about, that we felt like really helped tell the family story and about that decade. And then we gave them a page where they had to actually create the signage for their exhibit object. And then we provided a checklist to make sure that they had all of those things. We actually gave them that first time we were still using cassette recorders, but we checked out a cassette recorder and a cassette tape so that they actually were able to record their interview, because then that helped them later on, because sometimes if you just write down notes, you don't always get everything. So that is that was the actual project. And again, here is that object as a memory document. So that's right there in case you want to use it. We also, one of the things that we did with the museum exhibit was they did a gallery walk. So we had these are the step-by-step instructions for preparing our students for a gallery walk. And it's fairly extensive because we had never done one before. So we wanted our teachers to really have enough information. But then we also had a rubric that was, pull it up, there we go, that we asked the students to do as an assessment of their gallery walk, so that they had to reflect a little bit on it, but also to help us do a better job of making sure that our students knew what was expected of them, and it provided feedback for our kids who created their gallery, their museum exhibit. So so that's really helpful, and you don't have to do that. I mean, you could use that with a lot of different projects. Here is the template that I used for Pearl and Grace's museum exhibit. And so you can see that's already there. And the one thing we found that was actually the hardest was getting the perspective correct on these, because when students when you put that there, it's going to be a square. And so you have to maneuver that a little bit. But so there's the template for the one like I used, but here is in addition to the link that I showed you for the person who created that article, this is actually additional um, templates for that with all of the directions, screenshots and everything to help you look at those and see some examples of how those would look. And you can see some of those are quite elaborate. And for the younger the student, the simpler I would go. If you've got some, so I'm going to stick with something similar to this or this with fewer rooms because it can become pretty elaborate, and you might have some students that are ready to do that as they get older, but that's not how I would start them out. And then here are those 3 documents that come from StoryCorps. And I encourage you to, if you're not familiar with them, go to their website. The link is there in that first document. But go to their website. They have all of those great questions, but they have one of their projects is a veterans project. Another one is, let's see if I can just get you there. Another one is one that they have at Thanksgiving, and it's set up so that, and part of it is, at Thanksgiving, families have a tendency to get together, and here are some questions that you could ask to get information. Well, I'm not seeing it on there. Oops, I just lost my. Let's see if I can get back. I just lost my Google folder. I hate it when that happens. Let's see if I can get back there. Okay. I have way too many folders, and there we go. But anyway, I encourage you to take a look at StoryCorps because there's so much there. And I think their Thanksgiving project would be a great way to start. Let's talk about our family history, and here's how you can do it. And anything that you record as part of StoryCorps will actually, you can upload those, and it will actually go into the Library of Congress's collection of those. Then here is that decades project with all of the teacher instructions, and I think that's another less ambitious than the attic archaeology, but still something that really gives students a chance to look at that. And then this is just something that I threw in. If you are interested, I mentioned the last time that I have a connection with the Clinton Presidential Library, and they have an app that I can put on my phone. So when I go to there, any special exhibit they have, I can get some audio and some additional information that helps me dig a little deeper into that. Where did that go? And this article talks about several different kinds of apps, including some that give you a virtual museum experience, so that because some of these we can't travel there, but we can get there virtually. And so that's just a nice little article that that I think might prove helpful. And I don't know exactly how accurate this is, but there are some things that Wikipedia does that I think are pretty good. And you can actually look and find a list of all the museums in Kentucky. And so I pulled that up for you. So it actually gives you, if they have a website, it will give you the link. to it, and it will give you some basic information about where it is, but you can probably find some additional. But I just, I have a list like this for Arkansas because I never know who I'm going to try to connect to a museum, and it's nice to have that list. And so I did a little digging, and there may be a better one, but Wikipedia, there was a study done and they were every bit as accurate as Britannica Encyclopedia. Um, and um, and I noticed that you all had Britannica as one of your databases on your Kentucky Virtual Library. So I feel pretty confident that I'm giving you at least a semi-accurate list. So that's the folder. All of those things are there for you. The slides are there. So every one of the links that I shared with you is built into that. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. And if there are any questions, I am happy to answer any questions that I can. I'm sure that all the links will get added to the wakelet that you're keeping. So
yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to say is I know the question was posed. They will absolutely get added to the wakelet. And I just wanted to do a quick I know I was looking, you all may have seen me kind of looking off to the side. The last time that we had Cassandra on with us, we gave you a challenge and it had a little bit of money tied to it. So for those of you that are watching the recording, those of you that are with us live, we asked you, or I know there was a little bit of confusion because I got some emails after the fact, and I think we just put it on invoice 2. And I know several of you are getting really close to invoice 1. You're maxing out, I know, but that invoice 2, you all still have lots of kind of buffer on ways that you can add and make money on invoice 2. And we ask that you, if you watch this recording or if you were here live, that you took any of the resources that Cassandra talked about in this session last time, and you just turn in a lesson plan. It could be your district lesson plan. It could be the lesson plan template that we gave you online. And I will post that now because only 36 of you completed that. And it was a really easy way to make $50. And again, it was anything that in your lesson plan from resources that she gave us last time. It, however you're going to use it in your classroom. 36 of you completed that. And if you turn it in on the invoice last time, you already received that $50. Here's what we're going to do this time. Because you know me, I love to give out money. The same thing applies. This was so jam-packed with strategies, resources, how you can use it in your classroom. I also know it is getting close to testing, and this will be how can you use what she's given us today for next year. Okay, so go ahead and be thinking like, oh, wow, I really want to do. I was writing notes. I think the attic archaeology, that sounds amazing. Like, how many of you think I'm going to use that in my classroom? That's something I can definitely use with my students. Maybe you're super adventuresome and you've been watching all these Kelly Fisher lessons and you're like, I'm going to do a virtual museum. Woohoo! I don't know that I could do that. Melissa says we're already planning. Make a lesson plan, turn it in, and get an extra $50. So here's for those of you that maybe thought, wow, Wendy, I lost that somewhere. I don't even know about that first $50. You can turn in 2 lesson plans now. And if my math is correct, 50 and 50 is $100 on invoice 2. So, and the crowd goes wild. I know. So here's what you have to do though. Make sure, because you know Gabby and she will get you on this. The first lesson plan has to be over the first cadre session. The second lesson plan has to be over the second cadre session. So essentially, you're going to turn in 2 forms. So I'm going to send this form out. So I'm going to say, this is what I'm sending. It says invoice 2, lesson plan, $50. So Cassandra, you're on my screen. I see your face. So if Cassandra already turned in one, I know because I looked at the names of the people that had already turned in one. So Cassandra can't turn in because she's already turned in one. So she would turn in this second one for her $50 for this session. Everybody got that? Everybody cool with that? So if you did not turn in the first one, you can turn in 2, but you have to turn it in once. So like if David Johnson didn't turn in one, he's going to turn in the first form, hit complete, and then he will submit another form and hit complete. So you're turning the same form. There's not 2 different forms, same form, but 2 different times. Got it? We're trying to make this as easy as possible. You can use our form or you can use your district form. I know that Kara and Melissa are probably planning a unit. So if they want to get together and do their unit, turn in your unit. We do not want you to reinvent the wheel just to say, hey, I'm doing what KEDC wants us to do. Make this for you. And that's our whole goal in this, is whatever works for you. Don't do something else to reinvent the wheel for us. This is all about how are you going to use what you've learned in this session to better you, to better your students, and let us pay you for it. That's our whole goal, is we want to pay you for the amazing work you're already doing. And this checks the box for our grant to say, look, they're really implementing with fidelity. So, yeah. Okay.
And are you, and Wendy,
sorry.
are you planning on sharing those so that
We
other
are.
people can tap into
We
those?
are. So here's what we
Awesome.
will do. After we get all of these wonderful resources back, guess where they're going to go? On the Wakelet. So you can see the amazing things that Kara will ask for permission, of course. But so if Kara and Melissa says, I don't mind if my lesson plans are shared with the group, they will then go on the Wakelet and you can see what everybody else is doing and planning and sharing. And so you can see the whole group's lesson plans for share out. My goal is that we can have all of these ready for you by summer conference, so that when you really start digging in and planning with all the amazing things, other things that are going to happen at summer conference, is that you'll have all this wonderful, stuff to go at summer conference as well. So that's the first thing, is this wonderful lesson plan. You've got up to $100 on invoice 2. There will be some other things added on invoice 2. So just be checking. I'm looking for ways that at the end of the year, we can kind of be checking off some cool things for you to happen and other ways to earn money. We do not want to stress you out. I remember what this time of year is like, but awesome. I will say that one of your dear friends and colleagues, Miss Danielle Howard, has put some little bugs in my ear about some possible awesome testing things. And I hate to use that like testing things. That's really not what it is. But I had a wonderful call today with someone from Danielle. What's their name? I can't remember their name. What was it that you and I were talking about? What's their name? What's the company name? Remember their name. I've totally went blank. Anyway, they're coming to the conference. They're going to set up a session for social studies, ELA, and Kentucky studies. And if you go Simple Solutions, thank you. Why did my brain go? I don't know what's going on with me. I've talked to too many people today. So Simple Solutions will be at the conference. They'll bring workbooks for you. If you've never heard of Simple Solutions, that's okay, Danielle. If you've never heard of Simple Solutions, if you've never used Simple Solutions, they were talking to me. It could just be, here's the thing. I know marketing and I know all that, but they were like 30% gains. And I was like, are they going to take the test for our kids? I know that. I know how that all works, but anyway, he was really good. And I even think I conned him into buying our breakfast for us one day. So, hey, he's a good salesman. I'm a good salesman. There you go. So it was really good. We had a good conversation. But he's going to be there. He's going to bring someone. Yeah, you love it for science. Good. Everybody that I've talked to really, really likes it. But again, that's something that we can do for the grant for you. But again, I have to show. I'm leading up to the bad news. You all know how the Oreo sandwich goes. We have to show that you've been trained in it and all the merits, so that we just don't buy and throw a bunch of resources at you. That's never our goal, never our thing. Last thing, evaluation, not the last thing, almost the last thing. Here is your evaluation. This is your, again, your attendance check for today. Only thing I'm going to